Imagine for a second that you could undergo a surgical procedure tomorrow morning.
Okay.
You go to sleep, the anesthesia hits, and when you wake up, you are instantly, measurably on this rocket ship trajectory to becoming a once-in-a-generation genius.
Like beyond just really smart. We're talking paradigm-shifting genius.
Exactly. You're going to understand the underlying mechanics of the universe. You'll be able to read a massive, dense textbook in, a matter of minutes.
Wow.
You will be able to comprehend advanced multidimensional astrophysics just by glancing at a chalkboard. And honestly, it sounds like the absolute ultimate fantasy, doesn't it? The limitless brain.
Right. It's the superhero origin story everyone kind of daydreams about.
Right. But what if the very first thing that massive, newly unlocked intellect allows you to realize is that everyone you loved, everyone you thought was your friend before the surgery, had actually been laughing at you, not with you, your entire life?
Oof. Yeah, that completely inverts the whole premise of the fantasy.
It really does.
Suddenly, that gift of supreme intelligence isn't a superpower at all. It functions as this terrifyingly clear lens that exposes a very cruel, very isolating reality.
Yeah, it's a nightmare.
It is, because it forces you to completely reevaluate the foundational truths of your entire existence. And it raises this massive question, is it better to be happy and ignorant, or miserable and enlightened?
Exactly. And that devastating realization, that whiplash of awareness, is really the beating heart of what we are unpacking today. So welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are doing a comprehensive, deeply psychological and sociological analysis of a true science fiction and literary titan. We're talking about Flowers for Algernon.
Such a monumental piece of work.
It really is. And if you are listening to this, you likely already know the core premise, right? You know who Charlie Gordon is. So our mission today isn't just to retell you the plot.
No, that would be doing a disservice to the material.
Exactly. Drawing from a massive stack of literary analyses, historical context from the mid-20th century, and obviously a close reading of the text itself, we are going to explore how this narrative uses a fictional scientific experiment to ask massive, intensely uncomfortable questions.
And they are uncomfortable.
Very. We're looking at the illusion of intelligence as a metric for human dignity. We're getting into the incredibly murky, frankly terrifying ethics of mid-century neuroscience, and ultimately the true, undeniable value of empathy.
It is a profoundly heavy text. I mean, it really is. And to really grasp its weight and why it doesn't just read as, a standard sci-fi pulp story from the late 50s, we have to ground it in its real-world origin story.
Well, because this didn't just come out of nowhere.
Exactly. The author, Daniel Keyes, did not pull this concept out of thin air or from some theoretical physics journal. In the 1950s, he was teaching English in New York.
Okay.
Specifically, he was working in what was then called special education, teaching students with intellectual disabilities.
Right in the trenches of an education system that, let's be honest, was vastly different and often much crueler than what we understand today.
Vastly different. I mean, the 1950s education system was heavily reliant on extreme stratification based on raw IQ testing. If you didn't hit a certain number, you were segregated, period.
Just boxed up and separated.
Yeah. And one day, one of his students came up to him after class. The student asked to be transferred out of what they explicitly called the dummies class.
Wow, they really called it that.
They did. He wanted to go into the regular class. And his reason was incredibly simple. He told Keyes, I want to be smart.
I want to be smart. That is so raw.
It is. It's heartbreaking. And that single, deeply earnest request completely lodged itself in Keyes' mind. It bothered him. It haunted him, honestly, because he knew that within the biological and educational constraints of that era, he just couldn't give that student what he wanted. That interaction ultimately led to the creation of the protagonist, Charlie Gordon. It became the catalyst for exploring the profound, often tragic consequences of artificially enhanced intelligence.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because the legacy of that one classroom moment is just staggering.
Oh, absolutely.
It starts as a short story in 1959, then it wins the Hugo Award in 1960,
Right.
expands into a full novel in 1966, and eventually sells over 5 million copies. Like, if you grew up in the US or Japan, there's a very high chance you encountered this in a classroom.
Oh, definitely. It's a staple.
And it probably left a permanent scar on your psyche, honestly. But why? I think it's because it bypasses the sci-fi elements entirely and hits on a primal sociological fear.
Precisely. Keyes took the deeply human desire to belong, to just be part of the pack, and he amplified it. But to understand the true impact, we have to look at how Keyes forces you to experience this.
Right, the actual mechanics of the book.
Yeah. He doesn't write a third-person clinical observation of a man getting smarter. He locks you inside Charlie's head. Which brings us to the unique structure of the novel and the baseline of who Charlie Gordon actually is before the scalpels come out.
Let's establish that baseline, but let's go deeper than just his job. We know Charlie's 32. We know his IQ is 68. He works sweeping floors at Donner's Bakery, and he goes to night classes.
Right.
But the medium of the story is the progress report. Dr. Strauss and Professor Niemer, the scientists running this whole thing, make him write these journal entries. And those early entries, around early March, are structurally fascinating.
They are a masterclass in phonemic awareness or, well, the lack thereof. The spelling is entirely phonetic. The grammar is completely fractured. He writes progress report as Progress, RIPORT.
Yeah, progress report.
Exactly. But this isn't just a literary gimmick to make him sound simple. It's an incredibly accurate depiction of someone who has to sound out every single syllable because their brain hasn't developed the pattern recognition required for standard orthography.
So he's literally writing exactly what he hears in his own head.
Yes, and as you read it, you are forced to slow down your own reading pace. You literally have to sound out the words with him to understand what he's saying. The author is physically slowing your cognitive processing to mirror Charlie's.
That is such a great point. You are physically experiencing his cognitive friction, and you feel his struggle immediately, especially when he hits the medical bureaucracy early on.
Oh, the testing phase.
Yeah, let's talk about the Rorschach test scene, because I think this is where the book really starts firing its thematic warning shots. They bring him in, they show him the ink blots, and they ask him what he sees.
Right, the classic Rorschach ink blot test. And to understand why this scene is so critical, we have to step out of the book for a second and look at the history of the 1950s psychological landscape.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So Hermann Rorschach developed this test in the 1920s, but by the 1950s, it had become the absolute gold standard for psychoanalysis.
Everybody used it.
Everywhere. The theory was that the ink blot is a neutral stimulus. How your brain organizes that neutral, chaotic visual data and projects meaning onto it reveals your subconscious, your emotional functioning, and your capacity for abstract thought.
But wait, isn't the Rorschach test largely considered, well, highly subjective today, almost bordering on pseudoscience in some modern clinical contexts?
Oh, absolutely. Today, its validity is heavily debated, and it's certainly not used as a rigid metric for raw intelligence. But in the context of the era's narrative, the doctors treat it as an infallible metric. And the neurological difference between visual processing and abstract projection is what completely tricks Charlie up.
Because he doesn't project anything. He just sees the literal ink.
Exactly. Visual processing is just your optic nerve telling your brain, hey, there's a black shape here. Abstract projection requires your prefrontal cortex to say, what does this shape remind me of based on my past experiences and imagination?
And Charlie just doesn't have that bridge built yet?
He doesn't. So when they ask him what he sees, he tells the literal truth. He says he sees a smudge of ink. He assumes there's a hidden picture in the ink, like a puzzle, and he just isn't smart enough to find it.
Right, he thinks he's failing, because in his world, tests have very rigid right and wrong answers. He even brings a spare pair of glasses because he thinks his eyesight is the reason he can't see the pictures.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking, but it also shows a massive flaw in the scientists' methodology right from the jump. They are measuring a fish by its ability to climb a tree. They are using an abstract psychological tool to measure a man who operates entirely in the concrete, literal world.
And that rigid reliance on flawed metrics introduces the other primary relationship in the early text, the introduction of his rival, Algernon.
Algernon, the white laboratory mouse. And not just any mouse, a mouse that has already had this experimental genius-making brain surgery.
Yes. So to test Charlie's baseline against the mouse, they put them in a maze race. This is straight out of mid-century behaviorism, echoing the real-world experiments of Edward Tolman with rats in mazes.
Yeah, right.
Charlie has a pencil and paper maze, and Algernon is in a physical box maze, and Algernon absolutely destroys him consistently.
I try to put myself in that room, and the psychological cruelty of it is just staggering. I mean, imagine your deepest insecurity, the thing you're most profoundly self-conscious about.
Yeah.
Now, imagine being placed in a sterile room day after day, and having that insecurity measured against a literal rodent, and you are losing to the rodent.
It's degrading.
It is. But here's my question to you. Does this early setup, this man versus mouse dynamic, basically reveal the whole game? Do Strauss and Niemer essentially view Charlie not as a patient, but just as a heavier bipedal version of Algernon.
That is the exact implication, yes.
Okay.
And it is the foundation of the ethical nightmare that unfolds. The comparison to an animal isn't just a cute narrative parallel to give the book its title. It is the fundamental operational philosophy of the experiment.
They don't see his humanity.
They don't. They are treating him as a subject to be manipulated, not a human being with inherent dignity. Which brings us directly to the ethics of the operation itself.
Right, because Charlie is selected. The baseline testing is over, and they are going to slice into his brain. March 8th, the day of the surgery. And there is a detail here that I think is the most telling moment in the first act.
Which one?
Well, Charlie is terrified, which makes complete sense. But how does he prepare? He brings a lucky rabbit's foot, a lucky penny, and a horseshoe into the hospital.
It is an incredibly potent visual contrast. The doctors are offering him the bleeding edge of cold, hard, mid-century neuroscience. They have scalpels, enzymes, and neuropathway theories, and Charlie is holding onto a severed rabbit's foot, hoping magic protects him.
It's the clash of two entirely different epistemologies, the scientific method versus sympathetic magic, and it begs the massive question about informed consent.
Let's dive deep into that, because informed consent as a legal and ethical mandate was incredibly flimsy in the mid-20th century. We have to remember, this is the era shortly after Walter Freeman was driving around the country performing transorbital lobotomies with an ice pick.
Jesus.
Yeah. The medical community had a horrifying track record of viewing neurodivergent individuals, or people with intellectual disabilities, essentially as raw material for experimentation.
Wait, so you're telling me they were just cutting into brains with virtually zero oversight back then?
In many institutional settings, essentially yes. Look at the real-world history of places like the Willowbrook State School in New York, which was operating right around the time Keyes was writing.
What happened there?
The conditions were horrific, and residents were routinely subjected to unethical medical experiments, like being intentionally infected with hepatitis. Why? Because they were deemed wards of the state and incapable of refusing.
That is deeply chilling, and it perfectly contextualizes Professor Niemer.
Exactly. Niemer operates from that same mid-century paternalistic arrogance. He has Charlie sign a piece of paper. Charlie agrees to the surgery. He desperately wants to be smart. But with an IQ of 68, he fundamentally lacks the capacity to comprehend the physical and psychological risks of an unprecedented neurosurgery.
Right. How can he consent to the potential alteration of his core personality when he doesn't fully grasp what a personality even is?
He can't. He literally cannot conceptualize the idea of long-term unintended consequences. In his mind, it's a fairy tale. I go to sleep, the doctor waves a magic wand, I wake up smart, and suddenly I have lots of friends.
He thinks intelligence is just a currency you use to buy affection.
Yes. And the scientists completely bypass the moral obligation to ensure he understands what he is volunteering for. They see a breakthrough. They see tenure. They see their names in medical textbooks. And they see a willing, compliant subject.
It really forces you to step back. Let me put this to you, the listener. If you were Dr. Strauss or Professor Niemer sitting in that sterile 1950s office and you looked across the desk at Charlie, and you truly, deep down in the marrow of your bones, believed your surgical technique could fix him.
Right, if you really believed it.
Yeah. You could give him the gift of a normal life. Would you proceed? Knowing he doesn't understand the risks, at what point does a potential medical miracle justify the complete violation of bodily autonomy?
It is the ultimate tension between scientific utilitarianism, the idea of the greatest good for the greatest number, including future patients and individual human rights. They are so blinded by the potential of their own brilliance that they don't see a man taking a risk. They just see the next logical variable in their equation.
Well, they do the math, and they make the cut. They proceed with the surgery, and the results are completely explosive. But not immediately, and certainly not in the way Charlie expected. This brings us to the ascent, the awakening.
Let's analyze this period. Post-surgery, the initial reaction is just sheer frustration. Charlie wakes up, and he isn't instantly a genius. He doesn't suddenly know calculus.
He still can't beat the mouse.
Right, because intelligence isn't just the switch you flip, it's the capacity to acquire and apply knowledge. What the surgery actually did was drastically increase his neural plasticity and the speed at which his neurons can form new synaptic connections.
Okay, so the hardware is upgraded, but he still needs to download the software.
Exactly. So slowly at first, and then with terrifying speed, the gears start catching.
And the way Keyes writes this is brilliant. The text visually changes, the phonetic spelling vanishes, progress report finally becomes progress report.
Yep.
The syntax becomes layered, the vocabulary expands exponentially. You don't just read that he's getting smarter, you witness the structural integrity of his mind reinforcing itself on the page.
It is the ultimate show don't tell in literature. He learns to read rapidly, he beats Algernon, he begins absorbing complex theories. But as his cognitive capacity expands, his perception of his reality violently shifts.
Yeah, the lights turn on in the house, but he realizes he's living in a garbage dump. The innocence absolutely shatters. And we have to talk about the bakery, because I think this is the sociological core of the novel.
I agree.
The bakery was his entire universe.
It was his social ecosystem. He thought the bakers, guys like Gimpy and Joe Carp, were his best friends. They had this catchphrase, he really pulled a Charlie Gordon, which they said whenever someone made a stupid mistake.
Wow.
And the old Charlie would laugh right along with them, thinking he was part of the inside joke.
But the new Charlie, the awakening Charlie, decodes the subtext.
Yeah.
He finally has the processing power to read tone, body language, and context. He realizes they aren't laughing with him, they are laughing at him. They have been mocking him for years.
And what's crucial here is why they were mocking him.
Yeah.
They were keeping him around as a mascot. In a demanding working-class environment, having someone clearly beneath you in the hierarchy provides a psychological buffer.
It makes them feel better about themselves.
Exactly. It allowed them to feel superior, to bond over their shared relative competence compared to Charlie.
This completely destroys Charlie's core hypothesis. He got the surgery to get smart so he could have friends. But the intelligence exposes that the friendships were an illusion built entirely on his own ignorance.
And the tragedy accelerates because his brain doesn't stop at just understanding social subtext. He starts understanding the literal mechanics of the bakery business.
Oh, right, the dough mixers.
Yeah, he looks at how the dough mixers are aligned, does some rapid mental calculations regarding efficiency and workflow, and suggests a new layout that saves the owner thousands of dollars.
And he gets a promotion. He's operating the dough mixer now.
Yes. And shortly after, his new analytical skills allow him to notice a pattern in the inventory. He discovers that Gimpy, the head baker, a man Charlie has looked up to for years, has been systematically stealing from the bakery.
The old Charlie would have never noticed the discrepancy in the ledger. And even if he saw Gimpy take a cake, he wouldn't have grasped the moral and legal weight of embezzlement. So the new Charlie confronts Gimpy. He wrestles with the ethics of it and tries to do the right thing by the owner. And what happens? The entire staff, the whole ecosystem, turns on him like white blood cells attacking a virus. They sign a petition demanding the owner fire him.
Every single employee, except for one woman, Fanny Burden, signs that petition. Fanny is the only one who refuses, but she is completely overruled by the collective hostility of the group. Charlie is cast out of the only place he ever belonged.
Wait, I want to challenge the standard interpretation here.
Sure, go ahead.
A lot of critics say this is about Charlie becoming alienated because he's a genius and they can't relate to him anymore. Is it really just vague alienation, or is it base, raw, economic self-preservation?
What do you mean?
Well, if I'm working in a bakery and the guy who used to sweep the floor suddenly becomes a hyper-efficient genius who reorganizes the workflow and starts busting people for skimming off the top, I wouldn't just feel alienated. I'd feel like my livelihood, my daily grift, and my job security were actively threatened. Weren't the bakery workers just acting in ruthless self-preservation?
That is an incredibly sharp pushback, and you are absolutely right. It is economic and status self-preservation. This is the sociology of mediocrity. People generally do not bond over shared excellence. They bond over shared vulnerabilities and mutual complaints.
Right.
When Charlie lost his vulnerability, his intellectual deficit, he didn't just lose his place at the bottom of the hierarchy. He threatened the stability of the entire system. He was no longer a mascot. He was an auditor.
He became a liability to their comfort.
Exactly. They were perfectly comfortable with Charlie when they could pity him. Pity requires a power imbalance where the person feeling pity is on top. When Charlie rises above them, he becomes a walking, talking mirror, reflecting their own inadequacies, their petty thefts, their lack of ambition.
Wow.
And human beings will almost always destroy the mirror rather than change their reflection.
That is a brilliant way to put it. So, Charlie is fired, and his intellectual trajectory is now moving so fast it's terrifying. I like to think of it like strapping a massive commercial jet engine onto a rusty bicycle.
That's a great analogy.
The thrust, the raw forward momentum is incredible. He is tearing down the runway of human knowledge. But the frame of the bicycle, his emotional maturity, his coping mechanisms, was never built to withstand that kind of torque. The frame starts shaking itself apart.
That perfectly captures his transition into the peak of his intelligence, which occurs roughly between April and June. The jet engine is roaring. He is operating at an incomprehensible genius level. He's absorbing college-level economics, history, and physics in a matter of days. He is composing symphonies of theoretical thought.
But the bicycle frame is cracking.
Yes, and we see that crack most clearly in his relationship with Alice Kinnean. Alice was his teacher at the adult night school. She recommended him for the surgery. She cares deeply for him, and as he gets smarter, that care blossoms into a mutual romantic attraction.
But the disparity between his intellectual age and his emotional age paralyzes him, doesn't it?
Completely. His intellect is a towering 185 IQ, but emotionally he is still essentially a traumatized child who has never navigated romantic intimacy. When he tries to connect with Alice, his brain sabotages him.
How so?
He overanalyzes every word, every gesture, to the point of complete emotional distance. He cannot just be with her. He has to observe himself being with her.
He is a giant trying to hold a butterfly, but he keeps crushing it because he's calculating the tensile strength of the wings instead of just looking at the colors.
Exactly.
And while his present emotional life is completely short-circuiting, his past comes violently knocking.
This is the neuroscience of trauma at play. When a person experiences severe early childhood trauma, the brain often compartmentalizes those memories as a survival mechanism. It literally builds neurological dams to hold back the flood of agonizing data.
But the surgery gave him artificial neuroplasticity. It forced his brain to build billions of new pathways.
Precisely. The artificially expanded neural networks basically bypass or dismantle those biological trauma dams. And the repressed memories come flooding into his active consciousness. He begins having visceral, terrifying flashbacks of his mother, Rose.
Rose is a profoundly disturbing figure in the text. We learn through these flashbacks about her frantic, abusive obsession with trying to make Charlie normal when he was a little boy.
Yes.
She refused to accept his diagnosis. She subjected him to quack medical treatments, physical abuse, and horrific emotional withholding.
She was violently obsessed with the appearance of normalcy, driven by the stigma of the 1930s and 40s. And when she eventually had a neurotypical daughter, Norma, Rose completely discarded Charlie.
Yeah.
She demanded he be sent away to a state institution because she feared he would be a danger to his sister.
So you have this man whose brain is currently solving the mysteries of the universe, suddenly paralyzed by the unearthed realization that his own mother threw him away like defective merchandise.
Yeah.
It is layer upon layer of isolation. And this all violently comes to a head at the climax of his intellectual ascent, the annual Psychological Association convention in Chicago.
The Chicago Convention. This is the moment the tension snaps. Dr. Strauss and Professor Niemer bring Charlie and Algernon the mouse to present their findings to the scientific community. It is their victory lap.
Picture the absolute absurdity of this scene. You have this stuffy, smoke-filled 1950s academic conference. Flash bulbs are popping. Academics in tailored suits are taking notes. There's a literal stage. And Charlie is sitting there possessing an intellect that vastly dwarfs every PhD in the room combined. But he's being treated like an exhibit.
And then, the inciting incident. Charlie overhears Professor Niemer talking to the press. Niemer, basking in the glow of his own perceived genius, explicitly calls Charlie a human that he engineered. He claims that he created him.
It is the Frankenstein parallel made literal, but with a twist. The monster isn't grunting. He is far more articulate, perceptive, and morally developed than the scientist. And the monster realizes his creator doesn't view him as a man. He views him as a patent, a product.
It is the absolute zenith of mid-century academic arrogance. Niemer is completely, fundamentally disregarding the fact that Charlie existed as a human being with a soul, a history, a family, and an identity before March 8th. To Niemer, the pre-surgery Charlie was just raw material, blank clay waiting for the potter's hand.
And how does Charlie react to this absolute dehumanization? He rebels. He doesn't just argue with them. He creates chaos. He opens Algernon's cage.
He unleashes the genius mouse into the convention hall.
I have to admit, amidst all the darkness, there's something deeply, darkly hilarious about this. These arrogant, self-important scientists diving under tables, women screaming, complete pandemonium, all because of a white laboratory mouse outsmarting them.
It's a brilliant moment of physical comedy that underscores a very serious thematic point. It is a profound act of solidarity. Charlie realizes he has more in common with the experimental rodent than he does with the men in the suits. So in the confusion, he grabs Algernon and flees the conference. He escapes, taking the only other living creature on Earth who understands the exact contours of his existence.
And having rejected the scientists, having rejected his role as their manufactured product, Charlie decides he has to synthesize his fractured identity. He goes on a harrowing, solitary search for his estranged family. He needs to know exactly where he came from before his brain was rewired.
He tracks down his father, Matt, who had separated from his mother years ago. Matt runs a barber shop now. Charlie goes in, sits in the barber chair, and gets a shave from his own father. But Matt doesn't recognize him at all. Charlie looks into his father's eyes, tries to find some spark of connection, but realizes that to Matt, Charlie Gordon is just a ghost from a past he wants to forget. He walks out, a stranger.
It's agonizing. Then he tracks down his sister, Norma, who has grown up believing the lie her mother told her that Charlie had died years ago in the Warren State home. And finally, the most terrifying confrontation. He finds his mother, Rose.
And this is where the full, tragic picture of his trauma is cemented. Rose is now elderly. She is slipping into dementia herself. And when she sees Charlie, her mind fractures across time. She oscillates between terrifying guilt and slipping back into the horrific delusion of her past, screaming at him to stay away from his sister, demanding his normalcy.
It's wild to think about the timing of this. Charlie's most profound realization of his own humanity, the brutal, visceral confrontation of his deepest family wounds, happens precisely when high society and the scientific community are trying to parade him around as a manufactured product with no past. He reclaims his traumatic history right when they try to erase it.
He essentially integrates his shadow self. He is finally truly a complete, complex human being.
Yeah.
But just as he achieves this synthesis, just as he reckons with his personhood and his genius, a ticking clock is introduced, and it is introduced by the very companion he liberated, Algernon.
Which brings us to the dreadful summer months, July and August. The tone of the progress reports shifts entirely. The expansive joy of discovery is replaced by a creeping clinical dread because Algernon starts changing.
The behavioral shifts in the mouse are terrifying because they are unpredictable. Algernon becomes erratic. He becomes uncharacteristically aggressive, biting people. He loses his motivation to run the maze. And then the true horror. He starts losing the physical and cognitive skills he had acquired. He forgets the pathways. He slams headfirst into walls of the maze he used to navigate flawlessly.
For Charlie, watching that mouse deteriorate isn't just sad in a pet owner way. It is a crystal ball. He is watching his own immediate future play out in miniature. He realizes the foundational science of the experiment is flawed.
So, armed with a brain that is vastly superior to the men who operated on him, Charlie frantically begins researching his own condition. He leverages the grant money, he takes over the lab, and he works day and night. He pores over the data, the neurochemical pathways, the enzyme balances, the metabolic load.
And he finds it. He finds the error in Namer's math. He writes a groundbreaking scientific paper and names the phenomenon after himself and the mouse, the Algernon-Gordon effect.
Now, the prompt for this text asks us to explain how this works within the world of the story. Think about the biology of it. The brain already consumes about 20% of the body's energy. If you use artificial enzymes to exponentially force the rapid generation of neural pathways and synaptic density, what we're calling the jet engine on the bicycle, the metabolic demand outstrips the biological supply. The infrastructure cannot support the hyperactivity.
So the cells basically burn themselves out.
Exactly. It triggers accelerated cellular apoptosis, cell death. The neuroplasticity acts like a rubber band that has been stretched leagues beyond its tensile limit, and now it is snapping back. And the mathematical proof he writes is horrifying in its precision. He calculates that artificially induced intelligence deteriorates at a rate of time directly proportional to the quantity of the increase.
Meaning, the faster and higher you go up, the faster and harder you crash down. An inverted parabola. It's the cruelty of physics applied directly to human cognition.
What is structurally brilliant here is how the mouse serves as a profound biological allegory. Algernon's physical and mental decline forces Charlie to confront his own mortality and the incredibly ephemeral nature of his genius. He has scaled the absolute peak of human potential, only to realize the mountain is turning to sand beneath his boots.
Let's just pause and talk about the tragic heroism of this moment. Think about this. Charlie Gordon's greatest, most magnificent, genius-level contribution to human science is proving his own impending, unavoidable doom. He uses his massive intellect to calculate exactly how and when he will lose that very intellect. I mean, does this make the sci-fi element of the story a metaphor for real-world conditions like early-onset dementia or Alzheimer's? Or is it simply a broader philosophical metaphor for the human condition of losing what we once took for granted?
It absolutely functions flawlessly as both. On a literal clinical level, Keyes captured the experience of degenerative cognitive diseases with terrifying accuracy. The acute, agonizing awareness of losing your faculties, the frustration of knowing you should know something but the pathway is gone, the fear of the impending dark. But broadly, yes, it serves as a universal metaphor for decline. We all age. We all lose capacities, memories, and physical prowess we once possessed. Charlie's trajectory is just our shared human condition, violently accelerated and concentrated into a few terrifying months.
Which leads us directly into the heartbreaking final act of Charlie's journey. The fall. We are looking at October and November, Progress Report 17. The decline is relentless, and as a reader, it is absolute torture to witness.
Because you see the language slipping. The complex multi-clause syntax unravels. The spelling mistakes start creeping back into the text. Knowledge becomes spelled N-O-L-L-E-G-E.
He starts suffering from terrible, blinding headaches. He experiences massive gaps in his memory, forgetting complex languages and theories he learned just weeks prior. He goes to the library, pulls out the very scientific papers he himself authored, and he can't read them. He looks at his own mathematical formulas, the proof of the Algernon-Gordon effect, and it looks like ancient hieroglyphics to him.
The psychological torture of that must be unimaginable. Being trapped inside a magnificent collapsing building and knowing you were the architect, but you've forgotten how to read the blueprints to find the exit. But amidst all this darkness and neurological collapse, there's a profound moment of human grace. He briefly reconnects with Alice Kinnean.
Yes. And it's a fascinating paradox. Despite his degrading intellect, or perhaps because the massive, paralyzing barrier of his overanalysis is finally breaking down, he is able to truly connect with her. He overcomes the deep-seated sexual and emotional anxiety that his mother's abuse had instilled in him. They share a beautiful, deeply fleeting moment of true intimacy.
It proves that emotional connection does not require a genius IQ. But then, in an act of what can only be described as agonizing, selfless love, he pushes her away.
He kicks her out of his apartment. He refuses to let her see him, and he does it because he cannot bear for her to watch him regress back into the man he was. He knows she loves the genius, Charlie, and he wants to spare her the pity and the pain of being tethered to an empty shell. He's protecting her from his own decline.
And then the ultimate regression occurs. He goes back to Donner's Bakery.
He goes back and he asks Mr. Donner for his old job back. He goes back to pushing the broom and sweeping the floors, but the dynamic has completely inverted. The men who used to mock him, the men who signed the petition to get him fired, they see what has happened to him. They see the devastating regression. And instead of mocking him, they protect him. When a new guy at the bakery who doesn't know the history tries to make a cruel joke at Charlie's expense, Gimpy, the very man Charlie got into trouble, steps in and violently defends Charlie.
It's a tragic shift. He has gone from being their punching bag to their terrifying superior, to their object of pity. And Charlie, who still retains just enough agonizing awareness to understand the social dynamics of what is happening, cannot stand the pity.
The pity is worse than the cruelty.
Because pity strips him of his agency. And that is the absolute breaking point for his presence in society. He makes a final, autonomous choice. He voluntarily commits himself to the Warren State Home, the very state-run facility for people with intellectual disabilities that his mother had threatened him with his entire life. He goes there so no one who knew him as a genius will ever have to look at him and feel sorry for him.
He banishes himself. And then we get the final report, the last entry in the book. It is written entirely in the childlike, fractured language of his early days. The spelling is phonetic, the sentences are simple, but the last sentence, the postscript,
P.S. Please, if you get a chance, put some flowers on Algernon's grave in the backyard.
it just wrecks you every single time.
It is a devastating ending. But if we look at the narrative structure of the novel, it's a perfect circle. Charlie is back exactly where he started intellectually, but psychologically he is burdened with what critics call the horror of forgetting.
What does that mean exactly?
It means he knows he was a genius, he knows he loved Alice, he knows he solved complex equations, but he can't access any of that information anymore. He remembers the feeling of the light, but he is trapped in the dark. He is living as a ghost in the shadow of his own former mind.
So what does this all mean? Let's look at that final request. He doesn't ask for a comic book. He doesn't ask for his lucky rabbit's foot back. He asks for flowers to be placed on the grave of a dead lab mouse. To me, that proves that Charlie was never just a frightened man with the intelligence of a 6-year-old, which is exactly how Professor Niemeyer viewed him. He was and remains a complete, deeply feeling human being. His massive intellect is gone, burned out by the very science that gave it to him, but his empathy, his capacity to recognize another creature's suffering and honor its memory remains entirely intact.
You've hit on the absolute core of the novel's thematic weight. His intellectual capacity was a temporary, artificially induced condition. But his humanity, characterized fundamentally by that empathy, was permanent.
Which is the perfect place to transition into the broader implications. With the plot concluded, we need to step back. There are massive themes and significant modern critiques of this text that you, the listener, really need to know to fully grasp why this book isn't just a relic of the 1960s, but a text that is still fiercely debated in academic and disability circles today.
Let's start with the sci-fi element itself. The neurosurgery, the genetic enzymatic treatments, these are speculative. The science is entirely fictional. Keyes wasn't trying to predict actual 21st century brain surgery.
Right, we aren't injecting mouse enzymes into people's prefrontal cortexes.
Exactly. The superpower of artificially induced intellect is merely a literary vehicle. Keyes used the sci-fi trope of a genius-level intellect not to predict the future of medicine, but to put a magnifying glass on the timeless human condition and societal structures.
It brings us to the synthesis of the core argument: intelligence versus identity. The story vehemently argues that a person's worth, their soul, their right to exist, is absolutely not determined by their IQ score. The tragedy of Charlie Gordon isn't just that he loses his intelligence, it's that society only valued him, only saw him as a real person when he possessed it. The novel exposes the intense cruelty of a society that judges human value, human dignity, and the right to autonomy solely by intellectual capacity.
The scientists treated him like a disposable guinea pig when his IQ was 68. They paraded him like a shiny trophy when his IQ was 185. But they never just treated him like Charlie. And this exact dynamic brings up a very important, very nuanced, modern scholarly critique. As the dialogue around neurodivergence and disability theory has evolved over the last few decades, some modern scholars look at Flowers for Algernon and argue that the text, despite its empathetic intentions, carries a significant risk.
Okay, let's unpack that. I want to make sure we represent this clearly. What is the specific risk scholars are pointing out?
The argument is grounded in the tension between the medical model of disability and the social model of disability. The novel operates heavily within the medical model, which views disability as a defect within the individual that needs to be cured or fixed. Modern scholars argue that the novel risks reinforcing a tragic view of intellectual disability, because the narrative frames the original condition, Charlie's baseline state, as a fate to be intensely pitied. It frames the cure, the surgery, as a desired, inevitable goal, even if it ends in disaster.
So the critique is that the book implies his natural biological state of being is inherently a tragedy that needs fixing, rather than a natural variation of the human experience that society should simply accommodate.
Precisely. Some scholars argue that by making his return to his baseline the ultimate tragic ending, the book might inadvertently send the message that living with an intellectual disability is a fate worse than death, or at least a deeply pitiable, agonizing existence.
Yeah.
It focuses on the tragedy of the deficit.
It's a fascinating tension, and I want to put this directly to you listening because it challenges how we consume the media of the past. Does the devastating ending imply that being like the original Charlie is inherently a tragedy? Or is the tragedy purely about the loss, the violent whiplash of having something beautiful given to you only to have it ripped away? I think it's crucial for you to consider how your own biases about intelligence shape your reading of that ending. Are you crying at the end of the book because Charlie is disabled again, or are you crying because Charlie is burdened with the phantom pain of knowing exactly what he lost?
That is the exact interpretive crossroad the author leaves us at. Is it the state of being or the painful awareness of the fall? The text incredibly allows for both readings simultaneously, which is why it remains such a potent piece of literature. It refuses to offer a simple, sanitized answer to the ethics of intelligence.
And that ambiguity, that refusal to let the reader off the hook, is what makes it a masterpiece. We have covered incredible ground today. We've tracked the emotional, sociological, and intellectual roller coaster of Charlie Gordon. We started with a man desperate for friends, watched him navigate the murky ethics of mid-century science, ascend to the incredibly lonely peak of human genius, and fall back into the shadows, leaving behind nothing but a simple request to honor a lab mouse.
It is a profound exploration of the arrogance of intellect, the dangers of viewing human beings as raw data, and the enduring fundamental nature of human empathy.
It really is a story that stays in your bones. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one lingering question. We talked a lot about the cruelty of the fall, but think about the ascent. If you were sitting in that doctor's office today and you were offered the exact same operation as Charlie Gordon, and the doctor told you with absolute undeniable certainty that you would achieve the secrets of the universe, you would understand the fabric of reality, you would touch the absolute limitless peak of human potential, but for exactly 1 month. And after that month, you would lose it all, and the only thing you would retain is the agonizing phantom pain of that loss. Would you still take the surgery? To see the sun for 30 days knowing you'll go blind? Or is the blissful ignorance of what you don't know the greatest gift you already possess?
A haunting question to end on. Thank you for taking this profound journey with us.
Thanks for joining us. We will catch you on the next deep dive.